Today on the Engage with Tech podcast, we're going to be talking to Dilini Sumanapala, who's going to be speaking to us about how she's transferred her skills from being a cognitive neuroscientist with a PhD into AI and machine learning. She's going to be offering us an insight into the industry and telling us how candidates can stand out, as well as what sort of skills hiring managers should be looking for. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hey Dillini, it's great to have you on the Engage with Tech podcast with us. How are you doing today?
I'm good, and yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for asking.
Lovely.
So I thought let's just jump straight into
Of course.
what you're doing right now then. So
Hmm.
I just want to know what first drew you into the world of AI, because from what I know of you, you were a cognitive neuroscientist, right? You had a
Yes.
PhD in cognitive neuroscience.
Yes.
So what drew you into the AI field initially?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people that are working in this space right now, certainly nobody knew that LLM explosions were going to happen. I don't think anybody even knew what large language models were until we had these big releases from OpenAI, etc. And prior to that, while I was in academia, I was kind of in the thick of machine learning. And I got into machine learning, I would say, in a very, very kind of challenging domain that's already very, it's quite a bit of mastery to be able to execute, which is MRI data. MRI data, even if you aren't dealing with machine learning, is incredibly complex data. And to be able to get enough signal to be able to kind of draw interpretations and conclusions about how the brain works. So yeah, I was in the middle of my PhD, and a big chunk of it, I spent most of my time kind of in getting to grips with applying machine learning in MRI. And then by the time I left academia, I kind of knew that I wanted to work in this sort of data space with this sort of predictive tooling and learn how to apply these skills in areas that are much more broad than neuroscience. I mean, neuroscience is extremely cool, and I still have some fantastic colleagues that I used to work with and doing amazing things in different parts of the world. But for me, I was really just attached to the methodology because I'd lived with it for so long. And I got into the contracting space, and I started building these small prototypes for companies, and then started specializing in natural language processing. And then lo and behold, we had the LLM age just kind of sprung on us in effect.
Yeah, a huge boom, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So would you say that the skills or the knowledge that you learned during your PhD and I suppose your master's and your bachelor's degree before that have lended themselves quite well to the large language models?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's no discounting, by the time my last academic engagement was with Birkbeck in London. And by the time I left that, I did a 1-year ed tech postdoc. I was probably in academia for a whole stretch of 10 years. And that's a very long time to kind of learn how to deal with data in a scientific way, in a rigorous way. You're not just there are certain protocols that you need to follow if you want to draw conclusions from data in a systematic way that isn't just you kind of looking for things that you want to find in the data. So all of that kind of skill was incredibly important even after leaving academia, and I think sometimes is deeply undervalued in industry, because people believe that, okay, if you're going to be a software engineer, if you're going to be a builder, you have to just exclusively have experience that comes from that space, when in reality you can have far more robust checks and balances in place for the things that you want to build if you come from a background, if you come from an experimental background with a PhD, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So you spoke a little bit about the prototypes that you've built already. Could you maybe expand on that for me?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I built back when I was thinking very much like I would say I was thinking way more like a statistician, and I was definitely naive to kind of thinking about strategy and business value, et cetera, as I got to partner with a company, with a marketing company that essentially tries to get engagement they work with game publishers. They work with game publishers, and their goal, they're hired to essentially boost game sales. And so what I was able to build for them was this kind of video game recommendation simulator to simulate the profile of someone who's most likely to recommend a specific video game to their friends and family. And there's a lot of things that if you can think about how someone might approach a job like that without data, it's very easy to kind of fall into these pitfalls of subjectivity where you go, okay, well, maybe it's the person who has the highest score that'll, recommend a game to their friends. Maybe it's the person that has the most money and they buy every single update, and then so they recommend it. And it's really not that straightforward. It's really not that clear cut. Different personality profiles, different, people have so many implicit behaviors, implicit things that we do that we're not consciously aware of, that can kind of drive how we interact with our world. And that was a kind of a great application, a great time to be a psychologist building something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say there must have been a big crossover between your cognitive neuroscience degree, PhD, and the large language model that you're building. So that must have been really interesting for you.
So that was kind of prior to, that was just a little bit before this this LLM explosion, this LLM Cambrian era, if you will. That was something that I built with quote unquote, we're calling it now traditional machine learning models, where you have all this numeric, you got lots and lots of numeric data, columns and rows, high dimensional data, and then you're able to kind of take all of these features and predict something, some sort of target variable. In this case, how likely was this person to recommend A versus B and whatnot. But essentially working with that kind of data, it's all numeric. That back then it was working with that kind of data. It's all numeric, and then these companies were also sitting on lots of text data, and they didn't really know what to do with it. And that's kind of how I got into the natural language processing side of things. And natural language processing before LLMs, you could do things like sentiment analysis. You could do things like, summarize data. You could do things like pull important entities and dates and names and things from data. So that was a fantastic segue, I'd say.
I expect it was, yeah. It sounds really interesting to me as well, because I come from a marketing background. So it's interesting to see that tech and marketing.
Absolutely, 100%. We're just experiencing this period of lots of blending of fields, and we don't have these strong partitions between fields anymore because there's so much kind of hybridization. And I think we're going to see, the job landscape is going to be very, very different, if not already quite different, and the kind of skill sets that you need to kind of prosper in this era.
Sure. My light's just gone off.
That's okay.
Right, there you go. So should we move on a little bit to talk about how the AI sector is evolving, I suppose, and at the moment, from a candidate's perspective, what are the sort of roles that you see are most in demand then, that companies are wanting the most?
Yeah, certainly the one that I'm seeing all over social media right now is applied AI engineer, because there are startups and there are lots of bigger companies that are looking for people with experience with the most recent tooling in this space. So things like LangChain and LangGraph, essentially these very, very novel stacks that have come out that essentially allow you to kind of build applications using large language models. So you don't have to build LLMs from scratch. You don't even have to fine tune them. You can take large language models that already exist, whether they're proprietary, whether they're open source, and you can build very cool applications around them. And certainly it's a space that's, of course it's going to be challenging to hire, because one of the trends that I'm seeing right now is companies want people with very long tenures, and they're completely ignoring the timeline of LLMs themselves. If you want someone who's been actively building with large language models, we're talking about 2 years max. And if you want a longer tenure than that, then you're going to have to knock on Sam Altman's door. You're going to have to start going and paying that money, to bring that talent on board, because then you're talking about people who are involved in sort of the proprietary building and the raw research and the, that really frontiered the IP behind these things. So, if you're talking about, if you want someone who can use those tools, then you're looking at somebody with, much shorter tenure, and tenure isn't even really a metric, I'd say, that you can use anymore, because you can rapidly build POCs and MVPs. And if you're then filtering by, okay, who's taken these applications to production, that's an incredibly tiny little, group of people. I mean, AWS certainly, even middle of last year, AWS was saying that they only had a success rate of 8% productionizing applications in the UK, because there's all of these other bells and whistles that come with just building stable software. And a lot of companies they've got a lot of prep work to do before they get to that point, for sure.
Yeah, sure. So why do you think there's so much demand for these applied AI engineers then?
I mean, I'd say certainly, it's one of those things where if you have the time and if you have the investment, there's a lot of it's an incredibly lucrative industry in terms of if you're able to build something that fulfills an actual need. Because really, if you take any company in the world, we are talking about systems that, by default have not been optimized. There's a lot of, any company that you can name will probably have lots and lots of admin and bureaucracy and processes that just have not been fine-tuned, and it just takes up space and time and bloat and hardware and data, and all of those things can be optimized. And you can make the argument that you don't need AI to do that. Yes, of course, you can make that argument, but AI just adds that additional layer of, oh, okay, we're sitting on this lake, lake house of data, huge data lake, and we don't know what to do with it. Where do we get started? And some of these jobs absolutely are, if you can build properly around them, are fantastic for large language models, certainly.
Sure. So going back then to the sort of misconceptions that hiring managers and people higher up in companies have about applied AI engineers and how much experience they should have.
Yeah.
If you're not looking at real world years in the industry, what sort of skills and assessments should hiring managers have then in order to find the right person for their company, or the most talented AI engineer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all about listening to a person speak about what they have built, why they have built it, what tools have they used to build it. It's very difficult to play the buzzword game. Keyword matching in this space right now is not going to get you the right candidates. It may help you filter them out a little bit, but really at the end of the day, it's about getting the candidate to walk through what they have built and why, just logically. And even sometimes asking a simple question like, well, did you need AI to build this? Like, what would it look like if you didn't use AI to build this? Let's imagine there were no large language models. What would be the most approximate thing that you could build close to what you've built? And what would be the difference between having a large language model in the build versus not, right? So then you're sort of comparing their ability to think generically as a software engineer, and then also to go, okay, well, this is the value add. Like, we have LLMs in this, in this build because it's really required. Like, we need it, because right now people can kind of fall down the trap of thinking that a problem is a problem for a large language model, when in reality it's probably just a very easy thing to automate, and it's got some fixed parameters. There's fixed inputs coming in, fixed outputs coming out, and you actually don't need LLMs. It can be like that. So of course that requires like a fairly, I wouldn't say completely deep, but some functional understanding of the space, as a recruiter, when you have to vet those answers.
Of course, yeah. So as an AI engineer then, I'm sure there's some very obvious skills that you should have if you're going to be successful in the field. But if you were to think of underrated skills, What
Mm.
sort of things come to mind then?
I think this is one that is not talked about enough in social media, and I think it's the fact that to get the best value out of large language models, you actually need to be a fantastic communicator. Because I
Okay.
think a lot of the roadblocks that people experience, especially when you have like, because right now you have sort of two ends of the spectrum, right? You've got people who use even something like ChatGPT, just the customer, standard interface, and they'll use something like ChatGPT and they'll say, oh, it lies all the time, it's so bad, it never does anything I want it to do, no, 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 no. And then you have other people who are like, I just wrote this grant for this application, and I managed to get the funding and do very very high level abstract things with LLMs, and you have everybody in the middle, right? And really, what separates these people from those people is like maybe these people are their actual facility with natural language is something that needs to be improved, and it's like
Mm.
we have to be introspective and we have to go like, okay, how would I explain something that I wanted to do? How would I delegate a task to another human being? How would I delegate a task to interns? If I had a bunch of junior developers, how would I explain something to them to get
Yeah,
them to do something the way that I want them to? Because if you are someone that has struggles to explain your point to particularly to juniors, I'd say you're going to struggle with large language models because otherwise you're just assuming that it has all the same information in your head. And a big
yeah,
part of it is just, can you use language to explain what you want built? And so that's that. I think certainly when you're interviewing people, you should get a sense of like how good are they at communicating their point. You know,
definitely.
if they're not particularly fluent communicators, then they're not going to be doing a great job at prompting. They're not going
Hmm.
to be able to come up with like 20 different ways to ask for something and then be able to evaluate the different answers, yada yada yada. So yeah, natural language. It's like the most obvious thing, but people don't talk about it.
Yeah, I think you're so right there. People don't talk about it, and it's something that just, um, yeah, it's so obvious
Yeah,
that people don't talk about it, I think.
yeah,
So
yeah.
do you see the role of a prompt engineer becoming something within the AI industry? Is that maybe a development as time goes on? Or do you think it'll be bigger than that? Or do you think it'll be something that's added to roles already?
I mean, not that long ago. Well, it was in the middle of 2023 that AWS they had this whole kind of natural language processing multi-day conference that happened in London,
Yeah.
and they had pretty much a whole day dedicated to like the frontier of prompt engineering, and a lot of it is. The deep prompt engineering stuff is kind of, in some ways, it's kind of hysterical to think about because it's almost like natural language. Once you start getting so precise with natural language, the symbols start coming back, and like we're using arithmetic symbols to kind of bracket certain statements and whatnot, and then suddenly it starts looking like code again. And you're
Yeah.
like, wow. But really, a lot of that research is about kind of trying to make language so precise that you
Mm.
can get, a consistent output every single time. And so, people who are publishing research in this space will tell you that there's absolutely going to be a massive difference between someone who's using these like very specific separators and maybe like, HTML code and little brackets and things to really tighten up a specific job that they want the LLM to do versus someone who's kind of quote unquote vibing, right? Writing things out as a vibe. You can do things with vibe coding, of course. You're going to get, vastly this person here who's got that precision down and has been doing that for multiple years is going to get very different outputs to the person here that is kind of explaining things to an LLM like they're explaining it to their friend.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, whether that means that the job will, you know, completely disappear or be completely automated, I don't. Very very hard to say. I would
Yeah.
just say a lot of people are discounting it right now. I don't think it's way too early to discount it.
Sure. So moving on a little bit then to find out your thoughts on AI right now and the things around AI that are potentially overhyped or maybe even underhyped. First of all, let's start off with the things that are overhyped. There's obviously so much talk around it and so many people use it, but as you're in the field, you'll know there's certain things that we talk about, the creative potentially, that are actually overhyped.
Yeah, I'd say I'm seeing a lot of posts, a lot of listings go up for people to already have lots of experience with fine-tuning models. Fine, that's great. If you have fine-tuning models as a skill, that's great. It's something that you can, there's a billion tutorials on fine-tuning models right now if you just do a simple Google search. However, I think that using that as like a very specific criteria to say, okay, we don't want to hire anybody who hasn't fine-tuned a model, that's a very big filter. That's a very, very big filter. Because ultimately there's so much more optimization that you can do for much cheaper before you get to the stage where you go, I've tried everything. It's time to fine-tune a model, Usually companies that are trying to fine-tune models, they haven't exhausted, first of all, they haven't exhausted prompt engineering. They haven't exhausted their orchestration itself. They haven't tidied up their data. They haven't put in the time investment to clean up their data and data processing pipelines. They haven't done the housekeeping, like the good housekeeping that you need to just have smooth transitions of like, okay, I know what's happening with my raw data. I know how it's being ingested. I know how the vector database is being stored. Like if you take a single node of an AI application, there's so many things that you can optimize within that node. Like let's say I go with a vector database provider. So a vector database will be storing all of this text data and preserving the semantic relationships, right? There are umpteen different ways to store data in a vector database, like even with a single provider, right? So there's all of these different things that you can explore before you say, okay, I need that compute, I need, the GPUs, let's train a big model for our needs. Because sometimes you can spend all that money and you can literally not get much more than like 1% or 2% improvement. And then you may not even see that, like in the actual application itself, right?
Yeah.
So companies need to be careful. Like, it's fine, it's great if you get a candidate that's fine-tuned a model, but they may have fine-tuned a model and like not improved the performance of the application at all, right? That's a possibility.
And when you say fine-tune, for people who, like me, who aren't as techie,
yes.
When you say fine-tuning, is that going into the back end of the large language model?
Yeah, so basically the idea with fine-tuning is you have all of these models that are released by, open source models and proprietary models, and you can use them as is, so to speak. So you kind of just plug them into an application through an API or something, or maybe if you have all the resources available, you can entirely download some models depending on how much compute you have. So you can use models out of the box. So that's straight up. When you fine-tune a model, what you're doing is you're kind of giving it extra data. You're going, okay, I want you to perform this task this way, and you're giving it some additional context, and you're trying to change the base behavior of the model by giving it more exemplars. So it could be like, I don't know, a data set with like 10,000 more examples of doing a very specific job. But that also kind of has downfalls, because sometimes when you fine-tune a model to do this A thing very, very well, maybe it loses performance on B thing. Maybe there's like B and C tasks. It might actually not do B and C tasks that well anymore, which is fine if you're only focusing on A, but maybe you wanted it to be like pretty good at A, B, and C, and not very good at A, but kind of not so great at B and C. So there's this kind of trade-off, You're not going to get across the board. You may not necessarily get across the board improvement from a model just because you're fine-tuning it.
Sure. So Are there any tools or frameworks right now that you are really excited by and are currently using?
Yeah, so I mean, one that is that I'm very excited by that I haven't gotten around to using yet because it's still very much changing and evolving, but I think will be very essential. These kinds of tools. Last night I was at an event by the company by this startup called Weights and Biases, and what they do is they have this very accessible interface that allows you to track your AI application's behavior. So let's say, for instance, it could be a chatbot. If it's a chatbot, you can kind of trace all of its answers, so all of the answers that it gives, and then you can even use an LLM to judge in some way to judge whether those answers are correct. And there's lots of different benchmarks. There's lots of different ways to kind of evaluate how chat applications perform. So I'm very, very excited by their work. And they one of the very cool things that they showed was that, let's say you have an application that is an agent, and it's an agent that is doing lots of different tasks. Mm-hmm. And if it's an agent that can do lots of different tasks, it needs to be able to grab the right tool to do that task. So let's say if it's some kind of calculation, then it needs to grab the right calculation tool. But maybe it doesn't get that right in the first try, and it grabs something else. Maybe it's grabbing like a web search tool instead. Mm-hmm. And so you can see where it makes mistakes. And you can even see how much, let's say if you're using a proprietary model, you can see how much the mistakes cost you. So it'll give like a little reading, be like, oh, okay, well that was 7 cents. Oh, but then it went back and it chose the right tool. Oh, that was 3 cents. So you can kind of see how your application, where the inefficiencies are, and also how much the inefficiencies might be costing you. So then you can go in and kind of change how things are, rigged up together so that hopefully you're able to make the application efficient, more efficient with time. So yeah, super excited. I haven't used that platform yet, but I want to get into it for sure.
Sure. So you've spoken about these different events that you've gone to. I'm just wondering how else you try and stay sharp within this field of AI that is constantly evolving.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the best way to stay on top of all of this material is really just to connect with people, connect with builders, connect with the companies that are at the forefront. And again, like there's nothing that beats knowing these people in person and then connecting with them in social media. And certainly, for someone who is, if you are not in a big city like London, if you are not in, San Francisco and all of these places, social media. Like, really, really just have a presence, interact with people. You can't be good at building in this space if you aren't actively connecting with the faces behind the technology, really. It doesn't mean that you have to add every co-founder. It just means connect with other software engineers, connect with other people that are, showcasing demos, be on Discords, be on, all of these, get to know your developer relations people from all these companies. And that's how you learn, because 99% of everything I've learned is kind of this sort of, social access to the social networks, access to the people.
I think that's true with everything as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in person always is going to beat social media, but social media is a close second, isn't it? If you can reach out and connect with a wide range of people, wide range of companies and founders, I think that is, like you say. So I'm interested to see or hear about what projects you're currently working on then.
Yeah, so at the moment, so just to kind of roll the clock back a little bit, the last thing that I was properly working on as a contract was I was employed by DataCamp to build a course on agents for them. So this is with the LangGraph and LangChain platform. And it was a great thing to work on because, again, with these very novel stacks, they can kind of develop a range, kind of a very broad range of reputation. Some people will be able to build with them very quickly, and other people will be trying to productionize with them very quickly, and some people will be like, oh yeah, this is fantastic, I was able to build something very cool, this is what we were able to do, and then other people will be like, oh, I couldn't get through the documentation, So it's great to sort of bridge that conversation, and essentially I was able to build interactive agents, and DataCamp is a fantastically interactive platform. So it's not just videos, it's not just, short YouTube tutorials. It's literally walking you through, the idea of chat assistance with access to different tools, and walking through like nodes and how to connect different nodes to do specific jobs. And again, having like the interactive space to set all of those things up yourself. That's the big kind of sell, essentially, for a platform like that. It's show, don't tell.
Sure. Yeah.
Once you get to play with it yourself, then you're a lot more convinced that you can actually build something with this. And then since then, I have just been connecting with as many founders and co-founders and CTOs, heads of data, as I can, to get the lay of the land. What do they need? What are they trying to build? A lot of people are still in the middle of securing funding, and everybody's at a different stage, and essentially just looking for alignment between the kind of things that I feel I can contribute positively towards, and what are they trying to build, and what are their priorities. And sometimes it's a case of like, are you actually AI native, or are you just AI on the tin, So there's a lot of, you have to vet that kind of thing as well. So yeah, it's definitely an ongoing process, and at the moment I'm working on some civics in AI demos that I'm gonna start posting most likely next week. And I've set myself an ambitious goal. We'll see if I reach it, but I'm hoping to post a demo a week. So really just, things that I think can make people's lives quite easier. But again, it's a point of connection. If someone sees inspiration in something that I'm building and they'd like to partner with me, then, I'm on LinkedIn and they can get in touch for sure.
Exactly. So let's move on to some of the advice that you would give to other candidates in your position then. What sort of skills do people looking for a job in AI currently need? What would you say are the most paramount skills?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we are, this is software engineering. So, to some degree, you don't have to be the most perfect coder. And right now I'm very anti-leet code. I'm very anti-hackering. I don't like these traditional coding tests because they assume that you don't have access to the internet at your job. They assume you don't have, it's not an organic coding environment. Everybody, any software engineer would be, living on different websites coding, even if we didn't have large language models. So that being said, you do need to code, and if you are using AI-assisted coding tools, that's great, but be accountable for every line of code that they produce. So you need to kind of you have to own the process. So even if you're kind of evaluating all of these different LLM outputs and you're using all of these different coding tools and you're like, I've got my subscription to Claude and I've got my subscription to Cursor and you've got all of these tools available, it's your neck on the line for everything that you built. So just be accountable. Just know, I've been in a position where I've been contracted to build something for someone, and then I'll try and get some of the processes done just with AI assisted coding, and then I'm looking at it and I'm going, I cannot understand this. I can't understand this. I'm not going to use it because I don't understand it. I don't understand it. So I'm gonna try again, and I'm gonna explain it differently, and I'm gonna try and break down exactly what I need so that I can go through the code and it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And because I have to be able to defend it. So I think that's a big part of what we're looking at. So certainly the ability to work with AI assisted coding tools will be very important. But also, it's on you. It's your IP. You have to be responsible.
Of course, yeah. So how would you suggest that someone like an AI engineer, they've just come out of university with a
Yeah.
qualification in AI engineering, how would you suggest they start if they're interested in getting into this AI field?
Certainly demos.
Mm.
You need, depending on how many things you were able to build, generally speaking, in academia, you spend so much time. You can, especially if you're just in, quote unquote, you're just in a master's. You may only do one capstone project, potentially. You may have spent a lot of time in classrooms with theory and everything, and that's fantastic. That's really, really good. But ultimately, hiring managers are looking for your ability to build for the real world. So look for examples. And it's fine, there are so many content creators across all of these platforms that are very benevolent and generous with their content, with their repos, with their demos. You don't have to clone what they're doing, but you can take inspiration. You can take 80 to 90% of inspiration from multiple different content creators and then synthesize something for yourself that you think meets a specific need. There's public data sets that you can work with. You can download public data sets from places like Kaggle. You can still build on your own, and it doesn't have to be this huge kind of orchestration on AWS or deploying on EC2 instances and whatnot. It doesn't have to be that big. You just have to show that you can build. And I think it's certainly not easy because obviously the job market is flooded. Absolutely. Not easy at all. But to set yourself apart from other people that are just relying on the degree, just build.
Yeah. I think that's really important as well because you came back to connection there as well. You spoke about people on LinkedIn, social media, sharing what they've done already and borrowing ideas from them. So I think connection is such a big thing.
It absolutely is.
So if you were to break everything that we've spoken today about, what is the one thing that our listeners should take away from this conversation then?
The one thing, this technology is not going away. So, even if you are kind of anti-AI hype, I would say think very realistically about the future. This technology, even if companies are dealing with challenges now in adoption, those challenges are going away at an exponential rate.
Yeah.
So the language models are getting smarter. I'm pretty sure, in the next couple months, we're definitely going to see models that are doing specific jobs better than humans at certain tasks. And to kind of anticipate that and to go, okay, you're going to be working with tools that have very, very high capabilities, and your job is going to become more and more abstract. So, if you're an AI engineer, don't think just about Python. Like, don't just make your entire personality Python. That can be automated. That will be completely automated very soon. You're gonna have to think about value and product, and is this something that strategically meets a business need? Can it be built cheaply? Who are the partners that you can work with on a project like this? Like, your people's jobs are going to become more and more abstract, and the human job is going to be about evaluating the outputs of lots and lots of automated jobs. And that's something to think about for sure.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.